What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Joe Hatagwa from Authentic African. And if you want to know why I failed in Africa, then this is the video for you. All right, guys. So for those of you who have been following for some time, you know who I am. But those of you who are new, my name is Joe Hatagwa. I'm the founder of Authentic African. This is Pan-African Perspectives. This is our weekly live stream. We talk about all things living, moving, investing on the continent of Africa. What is Authentic African about? It's about bridging the gap between Africans living in the diaspora and Africans living on the continent. The goal of this platform is to get people to do one of three things: move, visit, invest in Africa. We also sell products on our e-commerce store that are ethically sourced and handmade from people all around the continent of Africa. And of course, we have a number of other things that we are launching over the next couple of weeks, and I cannot wait to tell you about it. But why we're here today is because I didn't think about these things before I decided to move to Africa. And we're going to talk about all the ways that I failed when I moved. Many of you guys have heard the story as to why I came back, but we're going to get a little bit more into the details and the specifics so you guys really know exactly what all went down. So for those of you who are new to the platform and I haven't heard from you yet, let me know, number one, if you can hear me, give me a thumbs up so I know you can hear me, and then let me know where you are watching from. So if I can get from you guys what city and state or country you're watching from. No more country flags. You guys are testing my ability to know what flag is from what country. Every week, somebody sends me a country flag. I have no idea. I have no idea about these country flags. So I need you guys to say where you're watching from, the country and the town and the city. Okay, so Awele is watching from the UK. Shout out to Awele O, watching from the UK. Who else do we have here? All right, we got a few folks. So let me make sure I get those guys on screen so I can see them. So we have Valerie Grayson said you can hear me. Ms. Gina, 25, is watching from Illinois. Bricks Tricks says you can hear me. All right. Laka is watching from the UK. You know, okay, I know the UK flag, but that's the only one. Don't get me. Okay. We got is it Kuring is watching from South Sudan. Man, prayers with you guys in South Sudan right now. Valerie says Texas, US. Wanda says she's watching from California. Bricks Tricks, if I'm pronouncing that right, is Orange County, California. I had a good friend that lived, well, my sister actually was just living in Orange County. And a friend of mine lives there currently, and a friend and coworker. MC Dazzy says you're watching from Maryland. All right, cool. We got Ashton from Germany. We got Naman, what is it? Naman Demon? Naman Demon? Naman Denam. Sorry, Naman Denam. Whew. From South Africa, man, that was a tough one. Beast of Wawa is watching from Ohio. You like Wawa, the store? All right. We got B Still. B Still says failed in Africa. Africa has over 50 countries. That's true. It does. It does have over 50 countries. You know, this is an interesting one. Before we get into the topic, you know, when people say failed in Africa, when someone says Africa, right, and then someone wants to correct me for saying Africa, I know that Africa is a continent with 50 countries. But how about this? When people say America, everybody knows you're talking about the United States of America, although there's a North America and a South America, and even as part of there's a central part of South America, well, part of North America, actually. And so, so yes, I understand that Africa is 54 countries, but I lived in 2 countries. So I could have said failed in West Africa, or I could have put both countries in the title, but I said Africa, and you guys know what I mean. So thank you, Be Still, for offering your insights. But of course, we know that Africa has 54 countries, 53, maybe 51, depends on who you ask. With the new federation and the AES, we may start saying Africa has 51 countries, right? It was 54 if you broke out Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. But if we combine them as one federation, technically, then you have 51 countries, right? Or 52 countries, I guess. In any case, yes, we know there are over 50. Thank you. I'm well aware. All right. So what is the topic of today's discussion for those of you who are just joining is why I failed in Africa. What happened? What exactly happened? With detail, right? Because we're going to get into detail here about the story of my move and how it happened. I am a little over a year and 2 months living back in the United States full time, working in my previous career, building this platform as we are, and further along on my real estate projects and everything else I have going on the continent. And there's so many lessons that I've learned in a year since moving back and, going back and forth. And there were so many lessons I learned while living on the continent for a little over 4 years. And what I wanted to express to you all, because so many of you are interested in moving and so many people have been telling me they are moving, I want to go through my exact story because I kind of talked about it in different parts, in different ways. I want to just tell you all everything here with detail. So let's start from the beginning. You guys might remember the year of return, 2019, marked 400 years since the start of the transatlantic slave trade. The former president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, was part of an initiative that, and he gets credit for it, but there were many people involved in it. Ivy Prosper, who I've interviewed, many other people who you guys know were involved in that process. But the idea was to bring the diaspora back because you have the door of no return at the slave castles that say, obviously, they were never expected to return. So this was flipping that on its head and saying this was the year of return and people coming back. There were many different pillars to the year of return. And really, for me, it was an amazing experience. Last weekend, not the weekend that just passed, but the previous weekend, I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were kind of talking about our journeys moving to the continent because she has since moved back to the United States. And she was already living on the continent for 3 years by the time 2019 rolled around. And when that happened for me, within 12 months, I moved. And we were talking about that experience when we went to Ghana. And what happened for me there was an eye-opening experience. Most of my friends who had lived on the continent were living in Sierra Leone. Many of them had lived in the West, in the United States, and had either moved to Sierra Leone early in life, left and came back, or were just living there for, at that point, some people 20 years, 16 years at that time, living in Sierra Leone. I had talked to some people who had also lived in Nigeria and other places. And, the general consensus was you need to get here more often. And then eventually was to move. But I go to Ghana for the year of return. We do a screening of the short film, The German King, that I'm a co-producer on. I was an advisor to a company that was working with major TV and radio stations. You guys might know Adam FM, Joy.fm, these major radio stations and TV station, news stations in Ghana. And I was really impressed by what I saw there. It was an amazing experience doing the screening of the short film. I went to a brunch with a bunch of diasporans, many of which have been talking about moving. And I had this amazing experience in just the 4 days that I was in Ghana. Now, I had been going to Sierra Leone the previous 4 years, twice a year, every year. So I knew how to navigate a little bit around Sierra Leone to a degree. And I figured, Sierra Leone I wasn't ready to move to Sierra Leone as of yet, because my challenge was I don't have an NGO background or a master's degree. So many of the roles that are required or that are available require those prerequisites. So I knew that wasn't going to be for me. But when I got to Ghana, I saw that there was a thriving private sector outside of the NGO space. And I felt like, okay, this makes sense potentially for me. And, I had cash, right? So, the pandemic hits. I had a significant amount of cash in my bank at the beginning of the year in my bank account. By the end of that year, 2020, I had about $25,000 left in my account. And I decided not to acquire or purchase a house with that money. I said, when I leave the country, like a down payment, I said, when I leave the country, I'm going to need that cash when I get to Ghana. So I was interviewing for roles. And one of the people who I interviewed with was like, look, you need to be in country to get a job, but you have the background that you need to have we'll work to get you a role and a company to work for when you get here. So that shouldn't really be too much of an issue. A peer mentor of mine, when I got to Sierra Leone, I was in Sierra Leone for 2 months before I moved to Ghana. When I got to Sierra Leone, a peer mentor of mine called me and was like, look, I want to introduce you to the CEO of Jumia Ghana, which is an e-commerce company publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. I'm going to introduce you to the CEO. And we'll see if it makes sense for you, right? And so I was like, all right, perfect, let's do it. So I did that introduction, and they basically said, look, here's how we work. This is what we're up to. What's your background? Blah, 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 blah. It was a soft intro because, or what's the word I'm looking for? It was a warm intro because somebody knew them already. They vouched for me. And it was just a matter of me, meeting with the proper people internally to get the job. So within 3 months, I'm working, right? For about $30,000 a year or so. And, being paid in Ghana cedis though. So I got 20,000 in the bank. I'm thinking, okay, I got 25,000 in the bank. I am going to work for this job for 30,000. And so I thought in my mind, I had already done more than most people, which I probably did, but I had not done enough. So let me explain why. I had no idea about anything else. I had no idea how much rent would cost. I had no idea what neighborhood I wanted to live in Ghana, because at this point, I'd only been in Ghana for 4 days prior to moving to Ghana. The year before, I spent 4 days living in Ghana, right? And then I went back to Sierra Leone and came back to the States and went on about my daily life. And then the pandemic hit. I had been going to Sierra Leone, though, twice a year the previous 3 years. So I'd been, and then once the year before that. So I'd been to Sierra Leone 5 times. Going to Ghana, I saw that they had ride-sharing services, food delivery apps. So there were certain things that I felt like, all right, this kind of feels a little bit like what I'm used to in the States. So it'll be a smoother transition for me to go here than Sierra Leone, because Sierra Leone didn't have some of these apps and features. I always say Sierra Leone's a little bit more analog. Ghana's a little bit more digital. So I'm thinking to myself, all right, this is going to be an easy transition. How hard can it be? Right? I'll stay at an Airbnb for 6 months. I'm still, applying to be an advisor for these different incubators. And it looks like I have a job already, basically. So, the interview process lasted a couple more weeks. Even after I moved to Ghana, I'm still doing the interview process. But in March of 2021, the job is offered to me. I meet with my new manager, who had just moved from Kenya to Ghana, and he had worked at Jumia already. And we talked about what it's going to be like and what he was going to expect of me, and we're going to learn about this together, and it was exciting, right? I was like, all right, I've already invested in this company. It's a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. It's one of the first tech unicorns in African history. And, I had already invested in the stock market in this company. So I felt like, this was the best possible opportunity for me to succeed living on the continent. I was like, I did it right. All these other people who are doing this, and I hear these stories about people leaving, that's not me. Well, a couple things I did not take into consideration. Prior to moving, I had a significant amount of money at the beginning of the year in my bank account, and I quit my job, and I was, working as a consultant, etc. But that started to dry up because of the pandemic. So I didn't have as many consulting gigs as I had when I was a full-time employee, and I had consulting gigs, because I was getting upwards of 3,000, 4,000 a month sometimes from some of the consulting gigs that I was doing when I was working full-time and living in the United States. So I figured, as I was making my decision to move, those are going to come along with me. Even though they started drying up little by little because of the pandemic, I figured they'll come back, right? And so I'm like, no matter what I get paid, 3,000-4,000 extra, 30,000 for the year, 3,000 to 4,000, that's 30 something to, 40 something $1,000 additional to my salary per year. So I'll be great. I'm fine. Right. And that was my first mistake, was assuming that something that is out of my control, and it's wholly out of my control, was going to remain a constant. So that was my first mistake, is not having a constant source of income that is predictable. Right. So I definitely did not take that into consideration. So I just assumed those payments were going to keep coming. Now, obviously, in hindsight, it seems ridiculous to think that, right? Like, come on. Like, this doesn't make sense to just assume that you're going to be able to get consulting gigs forever and ever until the end of time. But I thought, okay, look, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. How hard could it be to make money on YouTube? Look at all these people making money on YouTube. That can't be that difficult. Right. So I was like, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. That'll be easy. I'll just post some videos every week. No problem. It's easy. I got my job, base salary, $30K per year. So that'll be easy. I got the YouTube, and I'll have some consulting. I'll probably make $80, $90, $100,000 per year. I'll be living like a king in Ghana. This is the mindset I had. I had spoken to other people too who had consulting gigs on the continent. And so they had expressed to me like what they were doing to consult, very different career and different consulting, like farming consulting, which is way more predictable, right? Because farms need people, right? And farming is one of the biggest areas getting investment on the continent of Africa. I was unaware of that obstacle. In my mind, I just thought I'm good, right? And so, I start working the job. I realized very quickly, I'm not going to stay here longer than a year, but I have to have at least a year on my resume at this job. And so I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to make money otherwise. And what I also realized too, was I had zero context and zero contacts in Ghana. So I started a job where I'm supposed to be in sales, where I'm pitching brands to advertise on this e-commerce store. And man, was that hard. It was very difficult. And also dealing with some of my coworkers was also very difficult too, because there was a little bit of challenges with some just around the fact that I was a Sierra Leonean American, I always represent Sierra Leone loud and proud. But also at the same time, I'm an American. And there was this viewpoint that me coming in there, although, I operate very humbly and especially in a new place, I came in there, but I was expected to be a senior leader, right? I was the head of a department. And so there was the expectation that I was to give directives and orders to people. Meanwhile, I'm this foreigner that's coming in there, that there's already some preconceived notions about me. So there were some challenges in that role for sure. And there were obstacles that made it more difficult than just the fact that I was still learning the role and learning the culture and the business culture and how things are done in Ghana in particular. But let's get back to the finances, because that 20,000 was gone very quickly. I would say probably within the first 6 months of living on the continent. So I moved in November of 2020. So by, let's say, April or so, 2 months into my job, the 20,000 was almost gone. And the reason for that was the secondary piece that I need to mention to you guys is how many monthly reoccurring bills we're used to collecting in the United States. Reoccurring bills for things that I was not actively working on. So for example, at the time, my e-commerce store with the Shopify and all of the apps that I had associated with it was $75 a month, right? My cell phone bill was $80 or so a month, $80 to $90 a month. There was just a number of expenses, right? I was working on building a house, right? That was $1,000 to $2,000 a month of expected investment monthly. So we're talking about just those three things that I'm mentioning is $1,200, right? That's $1,200 a month. And I was already spending the money. And by the way, I forgot to mention, what I did not realize when I got to Ghana is when you pay rent 6 months to a year up front, right? So my rent was $600. And so I paid $3,600, I think, right, up front to get into that apartment. So that's $3,600 right there out of the 25,000. And basically I also lived 2 months on the 25,000 in Sierra Leone. And then another month before getting paid again in Ghana. Actually, 2 months before getting paid. So I lived on the continent for 4 months with that money in the bank before I ever got one real paycheck in Ghana, right? And so then I put $3,600 down on rent. Not to mention I paid $1,000 to stay at Sun City, $1,300 to stay at Sun City. So you could do the math. Now we're into the teens in terms of teens of thousands, how much I had in the bank. After I paid rent for a month, I lived at one place, paid rent, Airbnbs, food, entertainment, whatever that might look like. And then I had my monthly bills in America. Then I had credit card bills, right? So I still had credit cards. And so I had to pay some of those back off. And so, all of these expenses, these monthly expenses, and then new expenses that I didn't take into consideration. So that 25K was we're now down to close to 15K, right? And that's just by the time I get to January, February, right? March, April, May, maybe not 6 months, it was all gone, but probably by 8 months into living on the continent, the 20 to 25,000 was gone. So now I'm living off of just the income that I'm making. My YouTube channel was monetized, so there's a little bit of money coming in there. And I had some side hustles here and there that was making me some money, doing some consulting wherever I could. And wherever people would offer me something, I would, take on some work, whether that was, working at concerts, and helping to organize it, or, all kinds of different things that I was doing. And what I did not realize was how expensive it can be if you're not really budgeting well. So just think about everything I just mentioned and how easy it is to run out of money quickly, right? And again, I was going into this knowing that it was likely that I was going to get a job. I'm going to pause it there, respond to some comments, because I want to hear your thoughts, and I also want to respond to your thoughts too, because I think there were a lot of comments coming in. Instagram is a flurry of people jumping in. United States of America is not so bad, is what Love for Real says. Okay. If that's what you will, that's your thoughts. Where in Africa did you live? So I lived in Accra, Ghana. I guess I should have said that. I moved to Ghana. So for those who just joined, I was living in Accra, Ghana. Tani says, Salom, brother. Thank you for sharing. Differently, great topic. Help hearing others avoid errors. Tandra says, did you move there with an American mindset and the expectation that you were owed something, or as a brother looking to reconnect with the people of the land and rebuilding trust and respect? So the latter of the two, of course. I don't believe that I'm owed anything. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm already, I have family living on the continent. My parents are both born and raised in Sierra Leone. They met and I was conceived in the United States, born in the US. So although I have grown up in the United States, I have a healthy respect and an understanding of the struggle on the continent. And I came there seeing how I could be of service, for sure. I co-founded a nonprofit. I'm on the board of a nonprofit with some friends on the continent, because that was our focus, right? Is to build, not just to take, right? So good question. But definitely I came with the right mindset in terms of how I wanted to proceed on the continent, the wrong mindset in terms of how I was going to sustain a living. So think about that. So I was not budgeting well. That 20,000 dwindled down, and then credit card debt started, I started incurring credit card debt. So I bought all my furniture on credit card. So I spent, I bought a washing machine. I bought beds, wardrobes, curtains, air mattresses, all kinds of stuff. Just stuff that I could have so that when people came, they'd have somewhere to stay. And the place just, my place that I moved into, because it was fully unfurnished, would have been a place to, a comfortable place for people who wanted to move in, right? Andy G says you need to reduce and preferably cut those recurring monthly expenses in America. 100%. That is the number one piece of advice that I would tell people. Now, you could decide to keep your phone number, which I wish I would have done. You don't know how many people over the last year have said, I've been texting some other person for a year, and I don't know why I didn't know why you weren't answering. And that's because I changed my number, because I lost my phone number because I wasn't paying that bill after a while. And so that number went back to Sprint. Sprint gave it to someone else. And so a phone number I had from 2004 until 2021 or 22, I no longer have that number. That number is no longer belongs to me. So anybody who's met me since then have gotten two different phone numbers from me for the United States. My iPhone died. I plugged it in somewhere. It got a surge, no surge protector, and it killed the motherboard of my iPhone. And so I had to try to repair that iPhone. And so the costs were just piling up. And I really did not have a plan. So now the year is up. And lucky for me, a good friend of mine who she always does this. She always brings opportunities to me. She came to me and said, there's opportunity potentially to consult for the company I work for. And so I went on to do that. But not before I racked up some debt. And so even though that role was paying a significant amount more, I'm not going to say how much that role was paying, but definitely was, good. Top 1% of the world, put it that way. It was a remote role. They wanted me to come to New York. And they weren't going to pay for my housing, but they were going to pay for my flight. So I had to come to New York once a quarter. And that experience was great. But then, you know what I did? Right back to that old income, right back to those same expenses. Monthly recurring expenses came right back in. Came to the United States, ordered a bunch of stuff on Amazon, brought a bunch of stuff with me, I brought up just basically all these new expenses. Re-upped at the apartment, because now I got this money again. So now I re-upped at the apartment, went back. It's 3-bedroom, 3.5 bathroom apartment for $600 a month, which, I think most people would say is pretty reasonably priced for Accra. You don't really find stuff like that at that price. And so I also did work in the apartment too. I forgot to mention that. So that was, I had to do some work to get hot water put in there. And so they covered half the cost, but I paid the other part. So yeah, look, I took this new job, and then I went right back to my old spending. So when I was coming to Sierra Leone, I was staying at the nice hotels again, right? So, I spent, so in the 2 months prior to me leaving that job, I spent I stayed in Sierra Leone for the whole month of December 2022. 2022? Yeah. The whole month of December 2022. After traveling back to America twice and spending a significant amount of money in the States, getting more monthly recurring bills, and then spending a significant amount of money at some of these hotels in Sierra Leone. I stayed at a hotel for, what was it? 5 weeks. I spent about a little over $2,000, like $1,500, between $1,500 and $2,000 staying there. And I was getting a discount because of the platform. So that's not what the daily rate and the monthly rate I got is not what other people would get at this place. So, I just really didn't think a lot of things through. And this is a good point that Andy G says. You need that US number for authentication. Get the most affordable plan that will allow you to receive SMS on the content. This is 100% true, because there were times where I needed to access funds, like my Robinhood account, for example. Robinhood is how you can invest in the stock market. I had cash in my Robinhood account, and I needed to access those funds because I was running low on cash, and I could not get into my Robinhood account because they were doing a 2-factor authentication, and they were trying to authenticate authenticate me, but my phone number, which I had recently lost, was the phone number associated with that account. And so I learned that lesson the hard way. Absolutely, if you move to the continent, maintain your US phone number. Get a cheap plan, whatever that might look like. You can get like a Metro PCS plan or one of these other plans, a Cricket mobile plan. These different plans that are out there, they're, you know, $20 or whatever per month. I definitely recommend you do that. Laka Luxury Apartment said, it's because of where you came from. For me, I was born in Sierra Leone, and when I moved to the UK, I knew what to expect before having any plans to move back to Sierra Leone. I built my apartment, which is an Airbnb. Smart move. Yeah, I did not do that, right? T Moore says, mi salon brother. Thanks for sharing your experience so others can learn. Been watching your videos on YouTube and found you on Facebook. Oh, yeah. I go live on Facebook as well. Thank you for the support. By the way, Facebook is growing. The Facebook platform is growing. So for those of you who watch on Facebook, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. So, yeah. So, you know, and I always tell my story, the specifics of my story, because I want you guys to hear what it might look like for someone who doesn't think these things through, right? And the reason why I do this, and I think a loss is not a loss, it's a lesson. I don't see it as a real failure. I just use that title so you guys can come and join. I see it as a learning lesson. Like, I learned a lot through that experience. And now when I move back to the continent, I'm going to move back with a completely different mindset and a completely different process and experience for moving. So, you know, again, I assumed that social media was going to be easy and that was going to pick up. And by the way, still, even to this day, at what is it, 34,000 something, whatever the number of subscribers is, I mean, it's still not enough to sustain a living. You're going to need to have over 100,000 plus to sustain a living on YouTube, at least, to sustain a living based on just YouTube ads alone. And maybe not if you pitch brands and you're able to get brands to pay you, but you're, at least for the ad revenue, you're going to need that. So a couple things that I learned along the way, right? So I didn't have a plan. So if you fail to plan, then you should plan to fail, right? I did not plan at all. I really did this with not much of a plan at all. So I mentioned I had 20K, got the job. That job decided they no longer wanted to expand to Africa, and they offered me two solutions. I could move back to New York, work for somebody else, which, by the way, they ended up firing that whole team, or I could part ways with them and figure out what I was going to do moving forward. And so I parted ways with them. And so after just around 12 months in that role went away. And so I didn't have much of a nest egg saved up because, of course, I was thinking I found the cheat code, work for a US-based company that pays six figures, and I will be able to do that and operate like that forever, you know, until I build up my other revenue streams. Well, that didn't work out. So a couple things too. So I didn't make any trips to Ghana before I moved to Ghana. So luckily I found an area that I like to live, but I didn't do any research on how much it should cost to rent, what part of town I should live in. None of that. I didn't think about any of that. I didn't think about my career background and how limited it would be for me. Like, it worked out that I found that e-commerce role. I just got lucky. The person quit on like the week of Black Friday in November, and I spoke to the CEO of Jumia Ghana in like the first week in December. If not for that person quitting, I would not have had a job, and that 20,000 would have been all I had to live off of. Because I moved without having a job in place. I got that job offer while I was already on the continent. So that is a wild risk to take, which I do not recommend anybody else do. I do not recommend you do that. And I've heard all kinds of people talk about their moving and their plans for moving and not having much else in place. I don't recommend you do that at all. And also the fact that I had expenses in Sierra Leone already too. So I had expenses in the United States, expenses in Sierra Leone, and then I was taking on new expenses in Ghana, which, by the way, without increasing my income, right? So I think for all of you who are making the decision to move, make sure you visit multiple times. This is why I've said this over the last couple of years, and I was even saying this when I was living in Ghana. Make sure you move. So let's get back to the story. So after those 12 months in that job at based in the US, they decided they don't want to move forward in Africa anymore. Hydrate, sorry. So What next? Well, then now it's time for me to move to Sierra Leone because I wasn't going to be able to pay that rent anymore. And my guest house on my property was going to be finished at this point in time, I thought within the next 2 months. And so I can go pay, like a $200 per month rent as my half of rent with a friend of mine. And we moved in together in Freetown in Sierra Leone. And I figured by this point I had about 50,000 followers on Instagram. This is around March of 2023 now. I had a pretty good following on Instagram at that point, was growing, was getting close, 30 to 50, moving to 50 and 50,000 followers. I think it was like 50,000. Yeah, it was 50,000 followers or so. And so I figured, all right, I'll be able to parlay this into a social media agency. And so moving to Sierra Leone, I didn't realize, I knew that the market, it was going to be challenging in that market, but I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. I figured I've been coming here enough. I've been building up enough of a network. I have friends who are here that can introduce me to the right people. It'll be simple, right? And so I started pitching. And I pitched 77. I had 77 meetings, or 76 or 77 meetings, and I only ended up with 3 clients. Three clients. 3 guys, 3. So if you guys might remember, if you guys have been following the live stream for some time, a couple 2 years ago, when I was talking about those clients that I had, it was those 3 clients, and one was paying $100 a month, another one was paying $500 a month, and another one was paying $500 a month. So that is $1,100, and I had expenses that I had to pay, right? But that was my income from that business venture. After 76 meetings, 3 clients paying $1,100 per month, and they only guaranteed a 3-month commitment. 3-month commitment. So, and man, you do not know how much work I did in those 3 months to even maintain those 3 clients. All right. Before I finish that story, let me get back to some more of the comments and thoughts. Nubian Starfish says, "We are so proud of you." I appreciate that. And some people are just joining. Somebody's watching from Kenya. I've been watching your YouTube just to see how your experience is similar with others in general. Okay. Diva Got No Purse says, "I have a story I want to talk about." All right, well, we'll bring you on. Email me, and we can tell your story at a later date. I want to talk to you first. So my email is right here on the bottom of the screen. Go ahead and email me at authenticafricanlife@gmail.com. And I'd be more than happy to tell your story, Diva. All right. So, okay, what else? Jada Faith said, "Did you get my email?" I have to double check. Sorry, Jada. Let me double check to see if I got your email. I will check after this live stream. What else do we have here that I want to make sure? Okay, Tendra says, "My sites are for Burkina Faso because of the leadership, non-Western influence, and help rebuild with the people." Yeah, I mean, look, I say, as long as you have a plan, right? And you have a lifestyle that you're used to or that you're ready for, and you have a plan to sustain it, go for it. The worst thing you can do is move somewhere without a plan, and just presume that your passion will feed you, because it won't. Right? Generally, your passion won't feed you, right? You're gonna have to have a way of sustaining income. Pastor Catherine Smith, shout out to Pastor Catherine, who joins from all forms, Instagram, YouTube sometimes. Pastor Catherine says, "Joe, do you believe that those who worked with you at Jumia were jealous of you?" I hate that, to answer that kind of a question that way with that phrase, because I've seen it so many times. It's cringy for me to hear people mention other people being jealous of them. Unless somebody says the words, "I'm jealous of you," I'm not going to say they were jealous. I'm going to say this. Was there a little bit of animosity? Sometimes, yes. Sometimes. I'm not going to say with all, because there were some really cool people. I just went back to Jumia offices 2 months ago when I went back the last time to visit. So I don't want to say, it wasn't everybody. But I did meet some animosity with a couple of folks, and there was a couple different reasons which I think I could leave that off the live stream for now. That's a conversation for another time. Maybe behind the paywall, we'll talk about it. But I think it didn't all have to do with me and the job. It had to do with other personal elements and aspects of what was going on in the office environment, where certain people didn't think I deserved certain things. So we'll just leave it that way. But as far as the role is concerned, I think people understood that I had the background, right? Because I came in there with 17 years experience. Sorry. I came in there with 15 years experience by the time I got to, my time there, right? Because I'm, 15 years experience. Because I'm at this point, I'm almost at 20 years experience doing what I do. So with 14 or 15 years experience, they, that was clear, right? I was older than most people that when I was coming in there, and I was a department head. So I don't think people felt like I didn't deserve the role necessarily. I just don't think they thought they should listen to me. You know what I mean? It's like this foreigner thinks he understands Ghana. And and there were some other things, social and personal things that some people took offense with. And it had nothing to do with the job. It had nothing to do with my performance. It was just whatever. So yeah, I mean, I would say there was some of that, but the other challenge too was trying to motivate people to come into work every day and to work hard for a really low income that was decreasing in value every month. I've mentioned this before, but Ghana currency, while I was there, went from 6 cedis to every dollar to 15 cedis to every $1. So it less than halved in its value in the time that I was there. And they were paying us in Ghana cedis. They were not paying us in dollars. And they refused to do an adjustment of our income based on the inflation and the decreasing in value of the money, of the currency. So it was very difficult to energize folks. But I found a way, and I learned. And I just had to work hard and learn. I mean, I was working all hours of the day and night for this job. And, it was the least I've been ever paid in my entire career. And it's the most I had ever worked in my entire career up until that point. I've definitely worked harder since then, for sure. But it's the hardest I've ever worked for the least amount of money I've ever been paid. And that is a hard thing to do. That's a hard thing to do. But I learned a lot. I mean, the goal was to work to learn, not to earn anyway. And I gained a lot from that experience. I learned a lot with my e-commerce store and how I'm running things. I realized where they went wrong and what they were doing that I think they could have fixed. And so I learned a lot for sure. 50 Shades of Glow, a 50+ travel and lifestyle. Okay. You have to have a plan. Don't move emotionally. You have to have USD passive income to cover your expenses. Everything else is gravy. Ghana is one of countries. Look at other countries. Okay, yes, there are other countries to move to. Yes. I really like what 50 Shades of Glow says here, though. You have to have a plan, and you have to have USD passive income. So those people who I have seen do really well are people who are former military. So in the military, at least the last person I spoke to, after about 20 years, you can leave and you can have, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, if that's changed at all, but you can leave and you can have your pension at 20 years. So for some people, that is at 38 years old, right? Because they get in at 18. For other people, that's 42 or whatever it is, 44. So you have that income, right? And then for other people, it's you own houses and you're renting those houses, right? You own property and you're renting and you're consistently getting rental income. So many people I've heard, in fact, most of the people who I've seen thriving on the continent have both, right? They've retired from their career early enough where they still have a pension, and they also have multiple homes where they have they have rental income that they're gaining before they made the move. And by the way, that to me is probably the best thing you can do is ensure that you have passive income. So Lenora, mentioned, I agree about the passive income. And Lenora, you could tell your story about what you've done. But Lenora lives on the continent. She's back and forth in different countries. I've now seen Lenora in 3 cities: Freetown, Accra, and in Brooklyn, New York. But Lenora lives on the continent, and she told me how she's doing things. And other people I've met too. They've all figured it out before they moved, and that's something I did not do. And so that's the purpose of this, right? It's to say what you should do differently, and what I didn't do. What else? Live on USD, not the currency of the country you're in. It is counterproductive. My guy Victor says, good to see you still going as I watch from afar. So many hurdles that are similar in both our countries. Did YouTube demonetize you? If so, why does it seem like you or African Stream have these issues? Okay, great question. So I was demonetized twice, 2 times, for different reasons, but we're back. We're monetized again. And Victor is Dominican, so I know that he's been thinking about doing a lot of what I've been talking about in Sierra Leone and in Ghana, in the DR. African Stream was kicked off the internet completely and entirely because of the content that they were producing. I do think from time to time that happens for me, especially on Instagram, because of the content that I produced. But I'm still going to continue to tell the stories, African stories, even if they don't want to hear it. But I have to be careful, though, how I do it. So, yes, that did happen. The real source says I've been hearing it's challenging to motivate people to work in Ghana and Sierra Leone. Do you find that to be true? Yeah, let me say this. Every tropical country you go to, when the weather is nice outside and you sitting inside all day long in front of a computer, it does make it difficult. We weren't made to sit in this position in front of a screen like this. Our bodies weren't made for it. That's why they have blue light glasses. That's why they tell you to get up and walk around. That's why they tell you if you don't do these stretches, you're going to end up with a hunchback, all these things, because this is not how we were made to live. So, yes, I will say it's sometimes hard to motivate people, especially for the little pay that they're getting paid, because these people have busted their behinds to get to the place that they've gotten to pay school fees, to pay for college, and to graduate, to make enough to barely sustain a living. It is tough. And so it is tough to motivate those people. I would say in the same way it's tough to motivate someone who got a 4-year degree and ends up working in fast food, right? Because that's kind of the equivalent to the pay in terms of the country equivalency, right? And so I would say that, yeah, it's very, very difficult to motivate many people, not everybody, and not in every country, because I found that a lot of times in Nigeria, my counterparts, they were motivated by fear, because there might be 20 or 30 other very intelligent, very capable hustlers that are willing to take your job for that little pay. And so that was a little bit different that I saw. So but there's still some challenges there. For sure, I had a guy who, maybe because he was just somebody that everybody relied on so heavily and he had been there for so long, that guy, man, you send him a message. This is in Nigeria. You send him a message, he gets back to you like on Slack. He might get back to you 5-6 hours later, 7 hours later, the next day. When you need something from him, he didn't have the bandwidth that day. We'll get to it tomorrow. Oh, the internet's off. Can't get on the internet. Sorry. So it does happen every once in a while in Nigeria as well. But in Ghana and Sierra Leone, my experience was it was depending on the circumstance. The folks that were department heads, some of the smartest, hardworking people I've ever met, for sure. Most of the people who were upwardly mobile in their careers were very, very smart and very hardworking. What I found is many of the entry-level folks, especially right out of college, they were difficult to motivate. But that's everywhere. It's really hard to motivate people right out of college, especially if they're not getting paid well. Yeah, so you will find that for sure. And the environment in which they're working is very strenuous, right? So we're talking about a corporate environment, but if we're talking about some of these hotels and hospitality, a lot of times workplace harassment is a real thing for a lot of people. And so you find that, some people are just not excited to be at work, but this is the only option they have to feed their family. 50 Shades says, yeah, my neighbor lives on $7,000 a month. I think it's BANDS. That is a colloquialism for money. $7,000. Bands is like 1,000. So $7,000 a month in Kenya. For those who don't know, I don't know who's watching. I feel like most of you probably wouldn't know what 7 bands is, but just in case you don't. 50 Shades also says, don't look for a job. There you go. I think that's, if you're gonna look for a job and you want to work to learn, not to earn, I say go for it. But just make sure you don't make sure that that's not your only source of income. Lenora is going to be moving in October. So, Lenora has been going back and forth for years. So Lenora, and this was pre my advice, giving advice to people, but she just knew that she wasn't just going to up and move right away. I mean, she'd spent some time in Ghana, spent some time early in Sierra Leone, if I remember correctly, and was like going back and forth. But now she's moving in October. And I think I first met Lenora, was that in 2022, Lenora, when you were getting your Sierra Leonean citizenship at the Radisson Blu? I think was that when that was 2022, or was that 2021 when we met? But so you think about it, she's been going back and forth since then. And watching this live stream and other live streams to hear people's stories, to understand what's been going on in people's lives, so she can learn from their mistakes, so she doesn't have to worry about those for herself, right? And so now she's finally making the move in October, and that's after 3 years of doing research. And I think this is the decision, and this is the way to do it. What Lenora did is the way to do it. And Lenora, I know we've talked about this before, but I'd love to have you on to talk about your experience and how you made your decision. Lenora's gone through some land struggles and all kinds of different things. So she has a story to tell, but she took her time before making the decision, and it was the right way to go, for sure. Badina Babe says, or BB, sorry, says you can receive pension after 20 years of military service. The rate is higher after 30 years. There you go. Andy G says, I agree, passive is a must. Even as little as $250 a month goes a long way in Africa. Well, I think it depends on where you live. 50 Shades says, I'm moving in November. I've been working on it since. Okay. Hide current comment. Okay, cool. What are people saying on IG? Let's see. Joe, do you believe that those? Oh, the jealous question. Okay. Jealous because I was an American. Yeah, I mean, just to come back and answer that question for Pastor Smith. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I understand. And look, by the way, I'm not being discouraging about your question. I just know how it comes across when someone says other people are jealous of them. When you say that on just in the public, it comes across in a way that I think is off-putting. So that's the only reason why I was careful about how I responded to that question, because I don't want to come across like I feel like I'm better than anyone, because I'm not, well, not better than them anyway. So I wanted to be clear on that. But yeah, I mean, of course, sometimes things would come up. Sometimes they say, oh, with your American accent. I'm like, people don't enjoy American accents anymore. It's the British accent that wins. It's not the American accent. But yeah, it came up from time to time. People would say your American accent, and Pastor Smith says, Joe, I love your content and your story. Also, my dad's nurse in Houston is from Sierra Leone and knows your sister in Houston. Okay, shout out to the small Sierra Leonean community in Houston. Okay, your dad's nurse knows my sister. Yes, my sister is in Houston. Wow, it's a small world, huh? It is a small world. Shout out to you, Pastor Catherine, for making that happen. Joe, I don't think if this Joe, you don't think if it was Sierra Leone, it would be a different experience because it's of its home? I think it would have been harder sooner had I gone to Sierra Leone, because I wouldn't have had a job. I applied for jobs when I moved to Sierra Leone. I applied for a country manager job, which they decided to hire someone else, and I applied for a marketing manager role, where they said I was not their favorite candidate. That's the behind the scenes I heard from human resources. And not only was I not their favorite candidate, with by the way, more experience than what was required in that role, they still decided to go with someone. Well, they decided to potentially move forward with somebody they were friends with, and then eventually that they didn't actually hire that person, to be honest. They didn't end up hiring that person, so which is interesting. But it was a more like it was like a mid-level role. I was probably 2 steps above that in my experience. But I think that they probably were not enthused by the fact that I applied for the country manager role, and then I was being interviewed by the country manager. So there may have been a conflict in terms of them thinking like I might want to take their job. And sometimes I think that makes people a little bit nervous. But really, when I'm on the continent, for me, it's all about helping and doing as much as I can to grow in that role. And I mean, I didn't care it wasn't whether I was a country manager or anything else. I was working to learn and just for some income and to build a network. Right. And I was just doing the best that I could to help do what I can for a company that I thought was doing interesting things. But I hear that to this day, they still haven't hired for that role. But anyway, I applied for a bunch of roles in Sierra Leone. And so, no, I don't think had I moved to Sierra Leone, I would have actually had a better experience, because I did that almost 3 years into my living on the continent. And within a year, I was completely wiped out of cash, and life happens, things were happening, which I discussed in 2023 or 2024. And so when all of those things started to happen, I realized quickly that I was going to need to have the income that I was making in the United States to be able to cover some of those costs. So yeah, I think, look, we're almost at time. I see a lot of new people joining, and I wish I could stay on much longer, but I have some things that I have to jump to do. But I hope this has been helpful to you guys. I see a lot of engagement, so I appreciate you guys engaging in the conversation. Those of you who have made the move to the continent and have had to move back, or who've made the move to the continent and have done it the right way, I want to hear from you guys. And then something else that I want to mention to you guys. I am launching a direct booking site for folks who want to book short-term stays like an Airbnb or a Vrbo. So I'm looking for 2 different groups of people. If you own property anywhere on the continent of Africa and you're looking for additional bookings, let me know. Email me. My email is right there on the screen. It keeps scrolling across. So definitely email me. I want to hear from you. If you own property and you want to do subleasing like Airbnb, not subleasing, but short sublets, short leases, like an Airbnb, I have a direct booking site, which I will not share yet because the URL is not the URL I want it to be yet. So I need to change that. But I'm looking for people who want to list their site, their listings on my site. And if you're looking for somewhere to stay, email me as well. I can point you to my Airbnb. Right now I have not Airbnb, but short-term stays. It's not Airbnb because it's my own booking site. But right now I have listings in Ghana. I have 3 listings right now. I will have about 7 by the end of the week, I think. And we're looking at getting Uganda and another couple in Ghana as well. So, and then Sierra Leone is coming next. So if you guys know anybody who owns any land or has any houses that has them already on Airbnb or is planning to put them on Airbnb, you can put them in touch with me. Give them my email. They can get in touch with me and I can help them to market it and also to list it on my direct booking site. What else? Laka Luxury Apartment says, we'll email you, Joe. Yes, please email me. Yes, Laka, please email me. What else? Anybody else? Any other comments, thoughts, concerns? Laka says, but jealousy is real. It is real. It is real. I cannot say what somebody else was feeling unless those words were said. Long-term stays work. Good question, Lenore. Long-term stays work. I think the question is, well, we'll talk about it. Lenore, You can text me. We can talk. You and I can talk, Lenore, because I want to know what you're talking about, and then we'll see what makes sense. But generally, it's for short-term stays, like a month at a time, weeks at a time, and I'll explain it to you why, Lenora. But generally that's what I'm looking for now. But it could potentially be for longer. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns before we go? All right, guys. Well, I want to say once again, thank you. If you watched this long, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you know anybody who is planning to make the move, who's been there for some time and maybe struggling or is thriving, share this with them. Share my email with them and let them know. 90s nostalgia seems to think that I chose the wrong country. The only options in their mind are Senegal and Kenya. I think that's wrong. I think there are many options. It depends on you and where you want to move to. Every country, every background, and every industry has works in, have certain industries work in different countries, right? So it all depends on your background and what industry you want to work in. All of that is going to be contingent on what makes the most sense. What makes the most sense is going to be contingent on those things. All right, cool. I think I went over everything. I know I just went into story time. I hope this was helpful. If you guys found this useful, make sure you share this. Make sure you like. Make sure you comment on the replay. We want to make sure that YouTube stops shadow banning me. You guys aren't seeing my videos. Nobody's getting notifications. So I need your help to get this out to more people. All right. So I have to get out of here because I got somewhere to go. I want to thank you guys all for watching. And again, pass this on to anybody you know. So with that, I will see you all on the next video.